for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Elyathambi. My guests tonight are Dhewni Das, who is a Senior Officer for Advocacy and Research at Transparency International Sri Lanka. Good evening and welcome, Dhewni.
Thank you, Niresh. Happy to be here.
And of course, Manjula Gajanayake, who is the Executive Director of IRIS, which stands for the Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. Good evening and welcome, Manjula.
Hi, Niresh. Thanks for having me in this program.
Right. So there was a time in Sri Lanka when elections were willy-nilly. Anyone could collect money for their campaigns. Goodness knows who contributed. Whether it was locals or corporates or the corner shop mudalalis or hardware shops or even foreign contributors, nobody controlled it. But in 2023, this wonderful piece of legislation was brought in, which is called the Regulation of Election Expenditure Act number 3 of 2023. And since then, there has been a cap on expenditure by candidates who are running for elections. So that brings in a lot more control into the system. No longer is it the case that big money means you are going to win. And the Elections Commission has a strict control over how much money can be spent. So that's all very good. And this act came in 2023. And of course, the next elections that we had after that were the presidential election and the parliamentary election of 2024. And of course, it wasn't perfect. It was the first time this act was being used. So yes, there were a lot of things that we needed to learn from that experience. And today we are going to talk about the reports, the research reports that were done on the campaign finance. This is a series of reports by Transparency International Sri Lanka and of course our good friend Manjula Gajanayake. The main one is this one, which is the analysis of financial returns submitted by candidates in the 2024 presidential and parliamentary elections. So without further ado, can I ask Dhewni, tell us about the overall vision and aspects of putting this report together and what it's supposed to analyze.
Sure. Thank you, Niresh. So these, like you mentioned, these are 3 reports, and for full effect, they're meant to be read together. So the idea, the vision behind this was that we would analyze the current legal framework that exists in the country that is meant to regulate election expenditure or campaign finance. We would also then go on to assess that implementation of the framework. And then also the third aspect of this sort of bigger picture was that we would also assess lived experiences. So given that, the middle, sort of center of the center report that I mentioned is the one that Mr. Manjula also was conducted by Mr. Manjula, which was an analysis of the returns submitted by candidates for the presidential and parliamentary elections. The other reports, one is an analysis of the current legal framework in the country, and then the third report is an assessment of lived experiences of women candidates from ethnic and regional minorities in the country. So it sort of highlights issues within campaign finance and political finance in the country through 3 different avenues, right? So beginning with the sort of policy framework, what we did was we assessed where the loopholes lie currently, given even the new 2023 law, where it falls short, assessed it against certain international best practices, and also then laid out a series of recommendations. So something that's quite special about this particular report is that it's divided into two parts, and the second part focuses on a sort of guide for the private sector, so for the contributor as well, if you will. And then, of course, Mr. Manjula's report, I will leave to him to sort of go into the details of what the research process entailed, but it was essentially an assessment of submission of income and expenditure by presidential and parliamentary election candidates, and what the consequences of those submissions were, what they told us in terms of patterns of spending, and how they correlate with success in the electorate, success within the electorate, and it fed also into what changes need to be made to improve reporting, to improve transparency, and to really make the submission of income and expenditure by candidates meaningful, as opposed to just another sort of regulatory tick in the box. And of course, in the third report, we also wanted to cover the angle of, yes, we have to regulate spending and we have to regulate campaign finance, but also are we looking at that sort of who has access to campaign finance, moving back the starting point, and looking at women and minority representatives and what the challenges there are in actually assessing campaign finance in the first place. So those are the three reports, and that's the sort of big picture and approach that TISL took with these research.
Right. So there's a lot more to democracy than simply candidates campaigning and then the voters going and voting on election day. There is a lot more that has to be analyzed and corrected, new policies and processes and so on, and that's where this kind of research comes in, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's so much that goes behind an election that is more than just the campaigns that you see on TV or the speeches that are made at rallies. And there's also so much more responsibility on the state than only ensuring that an election takes place, right? In terms of how an election takes place, what the precursing environment was to that election, and ensuring that there's a level playing field in elections is incredibly important. And ultimately, the act of voting is a citizen empowering a representative, and that notion is severely undermined if campaign finance isn't regulated, because that transfer of power from the citizen to the representative is to ensure that decisions are made in the interest of the public, that policy decisions are made, laws are passed, that everyday life is regulated with the citizen in mind, with the person who is casting the vote in mind. And when campaign finance, when political finance is not regulated, then it's a serious hindrance to that entire framework, which is essentially the democratic framework. So if you ask me, campaign finance, the regulation of campaign and political finance, it lies at the heart of democracy, at the heart of good governance, and at the heart of anti-corruption as well, because so many of the policies that we advocate for, whether it's procurement, whether it's tax regulation, all of this is through your elected representative, right?
And it's all interconnected.
Right? And that is why safeguarding campaign finance and regulating it is so incredibly important in Sri Lanka, to avoid our government and policy being captured by an elite few, essentially, right?
Right. I'll come back to you in a more global context as well in a few minutes. But Manjula, you have been in the thick of things where elections have been concerned for a very, very long time, and you have seen the evolution of politics and governance, and especially elections in Sri Lanka, whether it was evolving backwards or evolving positively. That's another matter. But this particular 2023 Act certainly was positive. So tell us, how did you set about this particular project? Because again, it's a first of its kind, isn't it? You had to collect all this data and analyze it and come up with your conclusions. So tell us about how you went about it.
Thanks, Niresh. You know that the after the 1977, actually, that we didn't have such a law. Then that before, you know, that everyone knows that we had a golden rule of related to the campaign finance, but after the 2023, we have conducted 4 elections, including that small elections conducted for the LPTA Pradeshia Sabha. Then these are the 2 big elections, that national elections, presidential and parliamentary elections. When it comes to numbers, the parliamentary election, there were 8,888 candidates, including 434 national list candidates. As well as parliamentary elections, there were 39 candidates. 1 candidate passed away. Therefore, presidential election. Therefore, 38 presidential candidates altogether. There should be more than 9,500 income and expenditure reports. Out of 9,508 reports, then it seems that the 1,239 reports have not submitted. Therefore, we scrutinized 8,434 expenditure reports for this particular project. Then thanks to TISL, because this kind of development, this kind of projects that can be enriched the election history, as well as because this is a totally new law. Then no one knows that at the beginning there was an enthusiasm regarding this, but after that, the once candidates submitted their returns to the election commission, everyone was silent. That's why this is so important. When it comes to these reports, then we had to manually check and research on all those returns. Then the first thing is, Niresh, that regarding the absence, that 1,239 reports not submitted. Therefore, there should be a legal process, but unfortunately,
that's more than 13% of the candidates.
Yes, in between 13 to 15.
Very significantly large number.
Large number, because that the parliamentary election is a big election. Therefore, more than, they have not submitted more than 1,000 returns. Then that is a considerable portion when it comes to the whole picture.
So let me very quickly ask you, what happens to those 1,239 candidates who didn't submit their financial statements? What action is authorized under the Act by the Election Commission or whoever, Attorney General or whoever, to ensure that these candidates, these 1,239 candidates, are penalized?
Good question. Unfortunately, that when we ask from Election Commission, what they can, according to the Expenditure Act, what they can do, is collecting all the details and submitted to the Sri Lanka police. Then according to the Act, actually, they have to consult the Attorney General. After that, they have to wait until Attorney General consult them back. Then when we asked from Sri Lanka police, what they told us, out of 1,239 returns, they have submitted over 500 files to the Attorney General Department. As far as I know, they have not received advices from Attorney General Department. It's a loophole. Because that's why...
Well, that seems like a massive loophole.
Massive loophole.
Because now it's been nearly 2 years after the elections, 1 year and 10 months for the presidential, and about 1 year and 8 months for the parliamentary. So this is more than enough time. And if action hasn't even begun yet, what that tells me knowing how slowly justice works in this country, that the next time there's a national election, these candidates will, once there's nothing stopping them
Definitely.
from coming in again. So you know, you have a 5-year gap, and they have not been disqualified or penalized in some way.
Yeah, definitely. That's why that in this report, both myself and TISL has suggested that there should be an election enforcement authority to scrutinize these things and go forward with the taking legal actions. That's the only mechanism that we can impose. Otherwise, that the basic thing is, Niresh, you know that at the beginning there were 38 presidential candidates. 6 candidates have not been submitted their returns. Then subsequently, few of them were contested for the local government elections also. Then because during that gap, then again some of them were contesting for the parliamentary election also. Then they have not taken any actions. That it seems that it seems that Sri Lanka, when it comes to Sri Lanka police, these are not their priorities, because they have another lot of 5,000 or 6,000 logs, files. Then that's the basic thing. That's why we are always telling we should strengthen the election commission's legal and financial legal sections, as well as financial autonomy is important.
Well, from a common sense point of view, it would be much more useful if the elections commissioner was allowed to set up its own legal department, which would then prosecute these
Definitely,
candidates.
like Sebok.
Yes,
like Sebok.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't find the bribery commission running around in circles anymore.
Yes.
Thankfully, there was a time that they did, but thankfully they have been given that those powers. So the election commission should be given.
That is how other countries are working on this. But my personal observation is that you know that when it comes to the election management and proceedings, Sri Lankan Election Commission, even Indian election commissions are precise, and they are wonderfully well. Then they know how to conduct election. But when it comes to the campaign finance, they are in vulnerable positions. They are in risk, because you know, Niresh, that the electoral bond case in India, they also related to this part. They introduced electoral bond system scheme in 2018 under the Supreme Court guidance. They have annulled that scheme into 2024. Then my observation is most of election commissions are totally wonderful. They are good when conducting elections, but when it comes to campaign finance, they are vulnerable.
Right. And I would say that if these same candidates who did not declare their expenditure are allowed to contest again 5 years later, then the whole exercise has failed.
Yes.
Because in theory, one of those candidates could be the next president.
Yes.
Then what's going to happen? You know, is the police department going to take the president or the next president to court? This is getting silly. So these things have to be dealt with very quickly.
It is a good observation, Niresh. You know that we had a great hopes, as well as the people. They had a glimmer of hopes that this will work. Then regarding this problem, this issue, but that is why actually that we are suggesting to the election commission, you know, that there are 1,239 returns not submitted. Then according to the law, let's assume that in Colombo district there are 300 absence, the 300 returns have not submitted. Then relevant deputy or assistant commissioner should be approached Sri Lanka police personally. Then if there are 300 over 300 returns, what will happen? He should appear personally. Then it is only task maybe the whole year that he should perform. That's the problem. That's why we are telling them, if you have not submitted returns, there's a crystal clear, black and white. You know that you have not submitted. Then election commission take at least they can impose a fine, or they can ban from contesting next immediate 1 or 2 election. That's how we should work. That's why we have suggested, even this report launching ceremony also we suggested to the Election Commission. Luckily, Election Commission is so positive, but the problem is we have to go to the Parliament. The legislation, it is up to the legislators to pass this law, amend the law.
Yes, I must say the Election Commission itself did a fabulous job over the last few elections, and they worked very hard and so on. But clearly, they need more powers here. Manjula, I have to ask you, why can't the punitive action against such candidates be automatic? Why do you need to go to court at all? Because either you've submitted your document,
it is a crystal clear case,
or you haven't. So if you haven't, there should be something in the act which says automatic disqualification from perhaps for the next 5 years or something like that.
That is very practical. That is what it is. One thing that we have suggested. We already suggested to the Election Commission. They are so positive
because you don't need to flood the court system with another 1,000 cases.
If any candidates are not satisfied with the decision, they can go court. But not the Election Commission.
Exactly.
I mean, that is positive and progressive.
Yes, I mean, if they have submitted and somehow they got disqualified, they can go to court and say, prove that they submitted.
Definitely, there are few such amendments that we already suggested. That the one thing is, Niresh, that the official campaign in any election. Official campaign will start with the poll notice. However, when it comes to campaign returns, that campaign monitoring, all the Election Commission, and also we are collecting all the details from the nomination date. Then during that gap, that period, the candidates are spending massive money, funds during the campaign period.
Before the nomination day.
Yes.
So the pre-election period.
Pre-election period.
So that
pre-nomination period.
Pre-nomination period, that is not captured under the framework, right? So that sort of goes largely unregulated, which is one of the key loopholes that Manjula's report, as well as other reports.
Well, that is a massive loophole, isn't it? Because we have seen in many countries where a ruling party will start its campaign and run the campaign for months and then call a snap election, which means that the opposition parties would be at a disadvantage because they don't know when this election is coming, whereas the ruling party already knows. So definitely that's another loophole, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Right. Dhewni, can I ask you about international best practices in this regard? There are a lot of democracies which are not even as strong as ours. For example, in the United States, I think you can spend whatever you want as long as it is declared. But what always seems to happen is that both the major political parties are then captured, or their policies are captured by corporate America. And that is, that's been a huge complaint in the United States for decades. And so let's leave the US aside. But there are other democracies which have perhaps more stringent, better, more modern systems. Could you tell us in that context how good are we in Sri Lanka?
Seniors, the thing is, I think we can all agree we're a very good country at passing laws, right? We'll always pass new laws, we'll pass new legislation. It's the actual spirit of that legislation which we tend to fail to uphold. Like you mentioned, leaving the US aside, the other extreme case, the other extreme opposite that comes to mind for me is France. Actually, right, where there is an outright ban on private sector corporate donations, right? then you have systems like the UK or Germany, for instance, where where you can be eligible for public funding, right? If you're a candidate with lower presence, if you're an up-and-coming candidate, where then you rely less on donations, right? So there are schemes that candidates can apply for where the state would help them. There are trusts and there are funds sometimes, for example, if it's to do with mainstream media campaigning. There's I believe it's in Germany, where there's a sort of trust fund of money where all media houses donate to, and then that is divided according to a set criteria among candidates, right? So these are just examples of how to deter one donor or one donation from deciding an election, and then subsequently deciding policy outcomes, or things like that. So these are just some examples of how, given the fact that even stronger democracies than ours, more developed countries than ours, they are still going through the same thing in terms of especially campaign finance, right? Campaign finance is one of those issues that doesn't discriminate from the developed and less developed world. It is the same throughout, and simply because it is an avenue for more power over policy, more power over governance and decision making. So that is something. So what really matters is how it's implemented, right? So you have to sort of get a bit creative with how you implement it, but also how you monitor campaign finance, right? So we were just talking about sanctions for non-compliance and how to ensure that the law has a deterrent effect. But if we are to have to work with what we have, one thing that we need to strengthen and that we do fall short is with monitoring, right? With monitoring and reporting. So given that we would maybe have to work within this legal framework where, like you rightly said, it kind of completely falls apart if there is no punishment for non-compliance. What we can use the law for is to ensure that there's transparency, to ensure that there's a way for accountability, right? We can ensure that data is collected by the Election Commission, that they are capacitated with technical capacity and the financial resources to actually not just have this data piling up within their offices, but also to be able to analyze this data, to tell the people what this data means, and to also have it publicly accessible, right? So that is also something that we're lacking. We have to have a digital, public-facing online registry for all this information to be accessible, right? And it shouldn't be only during the election period. It needs to be all year round, right? People need to be able to access, and by people I mean civil society, journalists, and even the general public, right? To be able to access information relating to who funded the person who is currently in office, who funded my local representative. Because, for example, you can scrutinize against, a contract that was awarded, for example, right? If this particular company had you can refer to that this particular company had donated a large sum of money, and then 6 months down the line, once this person is elected, a state contract or a public contract is then awarded to this particular person, right? So that is essentially how the breakdown of political and campaign financing can affect people's lives every day, right? And having this information accessible all the time throughout the year, not just during the election period, is incredibly important. So even if we can't reach the international standards of the examples that I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we can still do things like this. We can still ensure that monitoring and compliance with reporting is implemented, even if we can't for now implement the bigger problems of sanctions and punishments.
Right. So there's much more to come. We'll take a short break now. I am in conversation with the Dhewni Dias and Manjula Gajanayake. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This weekend and every weekend, TV1 brings
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am with Dhewni Dias and Manjula Gajanayake, and we are discussing the nitty-gritties of campaign finance as it applies to our national elections. Now, Manjula, let's look at what happened in those two elections, presidential and parliamentary. So you had so many candidates.
Yeah.
For presidential, 38 candidates.
38,
yeah. Now, let me ask you, I presume the major candidates or the candidates representing major parties, that they would have submitted their statements, their financial statements, because I'm sure they themselves don't have to sit down and write it. They would get someone from the party to do it for them, perhaps an accountant, whereas somebody who is an individual trying to run might have to sit down and do it himself or herself. So am I correct in assuming that?
Your prediction is not 100% correct, because the legal requirement is that either nominating voter or recognized political party should be submitted their returns to the election commission. Out of the, when it comes to the presidential election, out of 38 financial returns that the 33 candidates have been submitted their returns, while political parties and recognized political parties and nominating voters, there were 6 political party, either political party or nominating voter were not submitted. That regarding the major candidates, we can see that most of them have been submitted. However, that Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe have submitted his report, but the nominating his nominating voter was his younger brother, Mr. Chana Wickremesinghe. He has not submitted this report. That it is very particular. The specifically we should mention here as a researcher, because in this report, you know why, that he has spent for the whole election campaign nearly 990 million rupees for the entire presidential campaign. He has obtained 2.2 million votes only. The fascinating thing is that his report is only 2-page, 1.5-page report to cover the expenses of 990 million. When comparing with other reports, let me to say that the Mr. Sajid Premadasa, he has submitted his reports. Even the political party Samagi Jana Balawegaya, their report nearly 300 pages, as well as when it comes to the NPP, their reports more than 1,611 pages report, because they have pasted all the bills and everything. That's the discrepancy, that because the Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe's side, actually it is only 1.5 pages, then we can't understand, we can't scrutinize what is included in his campaign.
So Manjula, now this looks like a massive lacuna as well, because if you can spend nearly ₹1 billion and then simply pay lip service to the law and submit a 1.5 page document as to how you spent 990 million rupees, that seems rather ridiculous. That's a lack of accounting as well as accountability.
And that was the second biggest fund of the presidential candidate, actually.
Right. So now this brings me to the point that there needs to be some accounting standard for this, because we see it in annual reports of companies and other institutions where you have to you go according to the accounting standards, global standards or national standards, which are prescribed. You can't, if you're a blue chip company and you're listed on the stock exchange, you can't submit a 1.5 page set of accounts, can you? No, you absolutely have to go according to the accounting standards. So why not the candidates?
When I saw that this report, the first place, that what came into my mind, it is something like, you are undermining this law. I mean, to cover such a huge amount, then when you are submitting 1.5 page, everyone will think that definitely you are undermining this fresh law, as well as that forgive me to telling this, but Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe is not amateur. I mean, the new campaigner for this arena. That he's a senior campaigner. Then we are expecting some more things from him and his side, as well as other thing is that when you are talking on the accounting side, that election commission, according to this law, they are expecting only the JP sign only, because they are attesting the candidate's originality only, that signature, but they are not checking the content of the reports. That's a lacuna.
So again, if you are a company and you're submitting your annual report, you need to have it certified by auditors.
Yes.
Which is another cost, of course, but you have to do so. Because there are stakeholders, whether they're shareholders or customers or whoever, all the stakeholders they have a right to know. So in this case, the voters have a right to know.
Yes, definitely.
Now, it's mind-boggling that if you have raised 990 million, and those are contributions from various people, you can't even list that in 1.5 pages.
And another thing is that there's another requirement that when you are receiving something, there should be the receivers, that the contributor's name, NIC number, personal address and everything. Niresh, if you are going through most of candidates reports submitted during the parliamentary election, even village level candidates, local candidates, they have some cases. I read that they have received 50,000 rupees, then 2 persons have donated, then they have nicely explained the name of the person who gave money, as well as NIC numbers and everything. That when it comes to the parliamentary election, there are one out of 159 members of NPP members. Most of them have explained nicely that they have explained and they have outlined the names and everything, that the income sources, they have revealed the income sources of their candidates.
Now, of course, I see that the president has submitted his finances, but what about the 225 members of parliament who won, obviously? Have they all submitted?
Yes, they have all submitted.
That's good to know.
They have all submitted. Again, there are many loopholes. Let me to say regarding the national candidates. There are 29 national list members in the parliament. Out of 29, let me to say maybe nearly 7 or 8 members have been submitted their report. However, it is just like a letter of wrote someone like small child, because they have included only the affidavits, even including President's Council, because they have included only affidavits, and they have removed all the essential details like mobile phones and what kind of vehicles they have used. They are exempted from the campaign, but you have to give more details, because always Election Commission and others are expecting you will reveal details proactive manner.
Yeah.
But we can't see.
So the point of this is traceability,
yeah, let me bring you in here. But what's the answer here? Shouldn't the law empower the Election Commission, or shouldn't it be in the law itself, in the Act, that these particular accounting standards should be followed? These details have to be included. This seems like, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the recommendations that comes out from the report is actually mandating an accounting standard in the disclosure of these returns. And see, there already are Election Commission guidelines that have been issued that by law it gives these regulations effect by this law, right? So candidates do have to adhere to a certain reporting standard, they have to submit certain supporting documents, because the whole point of this exercise, the whole point of giving some life to this law is that this information is traceable, right? It needs to be traceable. There needs to be some semblance of accountability and transparency that comes out of having this information. It's not supposed to be information. It's not supposed to be a box that is ticked by candidates to make them eligible to run for an election, right? It needs to serve a bigger purpose than that, and what it does is it safeguards the entire electoral process, and in addition to that, the governance processes in the country as well, right? So, given that, yes, absolutely, accounting standards need to be mandated, and in addition to that, third-party donations are really important, which is a huge loophole in the current framework. They are not regulated, right? Third-party donations are not regulated, and there's also no onus on the private sector and corporates to also disclose their political contributions, which is also very important, right? So
that's an interesting point, because let's say that you are a company and you want to curry favor with a politician. You're hoping that politician will win. You then contribute $1 million.
Right.
Where does that go in your accounting? Do you declare that as a company to your shareholders, if you're listed, to the stock exchange? I mean, all that needs to be looked at as well.
Exactly, especially given that donations in our legal framework have no cap. There's no limit. Right, sure, there's a expenditure limit for candidates that is set by the Election Commission before an election, but there is no cap on donations, which allows private actors to essentially pump as much money as they would as they want to into a campaign. And then that, coupled with the fact that third party and party donations as well, party contributions as well, go unreported within this framework, I mean, it completely undermines the purpose of having this law. Right? So these are serious loopholes that need to be fixed immediately. And
it seems like a no-brainer that every cent which is collected by candidates should be listed out. So and so gave $1 million, so and so gave 5,000 rupees. This particular company gave 10 million rupees, and that should be, the entire list should be there. That way, the voters know, okay, this guy, he's allied with these types of people. And once the candidate wins, if those companies suddenly get a lot more business, then there is a clear correlation.
Exactly. That feeds into, so many important governance processes, right? Our tax system, our public procurement, conflicts of interest within the governance space. Campaign finance is really at the heart of so many of these issues that we talk about. And if it's not regulated, and if these loopholes, if these reforms aren't pushed through soon, I mean, it's unfortunate, because we had these two elections that we really got to test out the law against, and fair play to the Election Commission and candidates themselves. There was a fair amount of submissions, and it was the fresh application of a fresh law, right? But now, like you said, almost 2 years since the presidential election, now we know lessons learned. Now we have, we know the challenges we've faced. We know the challenge that the state faces in terms of implementing the law. So it would be a real waste if now we don't take that and then translate that to some real gains in the legal framework.
Right.
Luckily, we have a small time, because if we assume that presidential law and both parliamentary election will hold on 2029, then we have a
some time.
little bit more time, but the sooner the better, I think.
Absolutely.
Yes. And the other side of the coin, Dhewni, is that just as much as the voter needs to know where the money is coming from, the voter also needs to know where the money has been spent.
Yeah.
So, for example, if it is spent on a certain television channel, or a newspaper or a radio station, then that is business for those media houses. And it's not just media; it is all around. Who is getting money in the campaign for this particular candidate.
Yeah.
So those allegiances have to be very transparent so that people know.
Exactly, and these are allegiances that precede this law by decades, right? And if there's any chance in breaking through those, these reforms are so incredibly important. The law itself, Manjula, it's a very small law, right, for such a massive issue that we're trying to tackle. And that isn't to say that, massive, comprehensive, long pieces of legislation are needed, but fruitful pieces of legislation are needed.
Absolutely.
Right? It needs to be fit for purpose.
Right.
And campaign finance is just not an area of governance that we can let fall through the cracks.
Right. We're almost out of time, so let me ask you this final question. What did you all learn in terms of women candidates and minority candidates? Any particular aspects in this campaign finance?
So like I mentioned earlier, the approach that we took with women candidates in minority communities was mainly qualitative, right? We wanted to truly understand the lived experiences, the implications of having this law on women candidates, focusing on within minority communities. So what we found out is that for candidates to even submit returns, to even know, to be aware of the law, to be able to actually fill out all of their expenditure and income, there has to be a source of income in the first place, right? So what we found out is that starting position varies significantly, right? And many women have this. What we found out through this study is that it starts at the political party, right? In terms of representation, in terms of mainly resources allocated within your party, right? That really is at the heart of an issue for a female candidate, right? So what we found out is that it's a lot of the representation that you do see is very tokenistic, right? So a political party would essentially allow female candidates to have nominations, but that would be to essentially fulfill a quota, for example, right? So they would nominate these female women candidates, but then not actually divert resources towards their campaigns for them to actually, garner any support, garner visibility. So they rely mostly on mainly debt, right? They certain women even attested to pawning jewelry in order to gain campaign funds, and then also they have to resort to On top of that, very grueling and labor-intensive campaigning like door-to-door campaigning, right? Whereas men were also included in this study to sort of give us that comparative analysis. They rely on sort of networks of patronage, right? Business, they have access to networks of business, corporate networks, right? And again, this also ties back to that sort of alliances that we talked about before that we said existed decades before this law came about, right? So, and those were substantially taken over by men. So this still is true to this day, and that feeds into the campaign finance sort of regulation when it comes to women. And even at the point of submitting sort of their campaign finance returns to the Election Commission, most female candidates had to rely on a man within their political party to do it for them, right? Because they weren't notified by their party, they weren't sort of taught how to do it, there was no exposure there. And then you obviously have your religious and regional barriers that come into play as well, that restrict mobility of women, right? So none of these factors are really considered by the political party, because there is no real sort of urge or need that they've identified to divert resources towards women candidates. It remains fairly tokenistic still.
It's a serious issue which needs a lot more study and action, I think. Manjula, the final word, and this I would like to ask you a specific question. What is the point in all this information, incomplete as it is, coming out 2 years after the election? Shouldn't this be online during the election so that the voter has the complete picture before deciding on whom to vote for? That means candidate A got contributions from companies X, Y, and Z, and it's this much. Should I then vote for that person, knowing that he or she is backed by these companies? Isn't that most important? Shouldn't it be online, where you have a, perhaps the Elections Commission website would have it. You click the candidate and you see the contribution.
No doubt about that. We already suggested to the Election Commission. I think that the Election Commission also searching avenues to empower this, because that campaign finance monitoring also coming under the Election Dispute Resolution Unit of Election Commission. We saw that they have taken some of proactive steps during last 2 elections. One thing is that the citizen-based application that anyone can complain towards Election Commission using that web-based application. Therefore, that what you suggested, that also we already suggested, and thanks for reminding again and again, because that that when it comes to other countries, we can see that this A and C and A, B, Z and all those people are giving contribution, and on a real time actually we can see the results. Then unfortunately, according to this law, our voters are seen all the financial reports after 31 days of the elections. That's the problem, because candidates are submitting their returns after 21 days. Then Election Commission is taking another 10 days to prepare all the documents. Then after 31 days only they are exhibit all those papers. Then online platform is so important, real-time dashboard maybe. Even not only Election Commission, organization like us, we can do that, but unfortunately we don't have the actual original documents. Then if Election Commission can contribute and align with us, even we can support. But it is the main duty of Election Commission. There is one thing, because after seeing only those dashboard or real updates, results, voters can make their decisions before casting their votes.
Absolutely. So a lot of conclusions coming out of these reports. Thank you very much to both your organizations for compiling this and simplifying it so that the general public has a better idea. and I'm afraid we are out of time. My thanks to Dhewni Dias, a Senior Officer for Advocacy and Research at Transparency International Sri Lanka, and Manjula Gajanayake, Executive Director of IRIS, that's the Institute for Democratic Reform and Electoral Studies. Thank you very much for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much, Naresh. It was a pleasure being here.
And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.